All Deathworld armies targeted one ship. Humanity's last battle started. The crew walked through long corridors that were dimly lit. Every few steps there were signs of damage. Some doors were bent, some walls were cracked. It was not a new ship, it was not a strong ship. But it was the only ship left. Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge and looked at the star map. The map was full of red dots. Each dot was a Deathworld fleet moving toward them. Every fleet came from a planet where life was brutal and hard. Each species had survived in a world that would kill a human in minutes. Now those species had united. The map showed that they were all heading to the same place, the last light. Alex was not a young captain. He was not famous. He was not a hero from old stories. He was just a man who had been given a job that no one else wanted. He spoke quietly into the ship's intercom. All stations report. We have enough supplies for 3 more days. Stars moved slowly outside. It was quiet, but the quiet was dangerous. It felt like the calm before a storm. He remembered the first time he heard about the Deathworld Alliance. It was only a rumor at first. A few commanders said it was impossible. No species that brutal would ever trust another species. No one would share power. They would fight each other until all were dead. But the rumor became truth. Every Deathworld species had joined. Every species had agreed on one goal: destroy humanity. Humans were weak, they said. Humans were fragile. Humans were too soft. They had soft bodies and soft hearts. They had never lived on a planet that would not forgive mistakes, so they wanted to end humanity before humans could grow stronger. And now the last light was the last chance for humanity to survive. Alex turned to his officers. They think we are already dead, he said. They think we are just a small ship with no hope. They think this will be easy. It was something closer to fear mixed with determination. He knew what the Deathworld armies were like. He had seen videos from old battles. He had heard stories from soldiers who returned. These species were not just strong. They were cruel. They were smart in the way that made humans uncomfortable. They had built weapons that could kill entire cities. They had built ships that could fly through storms and survive. They had built armies that never stopped fighting, and they were coming for one ship, the last light. Alex turned back to the star map. The red dots were closer now. The distance between them was shrinking. He spoke to the ship's computer. Open communications, send the message. A small screen lit up in front of him. The message was short and simple. It was meant to be heard by every Deathworld fleet that was listening. It said, they wanted the end, but he also knew that the message would be heard, and when it was heard, it would become a symbol of a species that refused to die quietly. He turned to Ryan Cole. How long until we lose power? Then we fight now. He remembered the green trees. He remembered the sound of rain. He remembered the way humans used to live. Now Earth was gone, or maybe it was still there, but it was not the same. The Deathworlds had attacked it long ago. They had destroyed cities. They had killed millions. They had taken what they wanted. Humanity had fought back. But humans had not been ready for a war against so many brutal species. Humanity had lost, and now the last light was the final answer. Alex walked down the corridor to the crew quarters. The ship was small, but it held a lot of people. There were soldiers, engineers, pilots, and civilians. There were children, too. A few families had been allowed to board. They had nowhere else to go. Alex entered a room where a small group of crew members were gathered. There were 6 of them. They were not officers. They were just regular people who had been given a job. One was a young woman named Emma Wright. She worked in communications. She was quiet, but her eyes were sharp. One was a man named Ben Carter, no relation to the captain. He was a mechanic. He was covered in grease. He looked like he had not slept in days. One was a woman named Megan Lewis. She was a soldier. She had a scar on her cheek. She looked like she had been through a lot. One was a man named Eric Dalton. He was a doctor. He was calm, but his hands shook slightly. One was a woman named Olivia Reed. She was a scientist. She was not afraid of anything, but she looked tired. And one was a boy named Noah, only 12 years old. He was the son of a crew member who had died earlier. He had been quiet since then. Alex stood in the room. The air was thick with fear. Emma looked up. Captain, are we really going to die? Then why are we still here? That humans are not weak. That humans do not give up. That humans will fight even when the odds are against them. It was a simple paper map. It showed the last light and the surrounding space. He pointed at a spot. Here is where we are. Here is where the enemy will come from. We can use the asteroid belt to hide our movements. We can use debris to block their sensors. What if they just fire at us from far away? His voice was small, but it was steady. My mom always said humans are like weeds. They grow in places where nothing else can. He had given them a plan. He walked back to the bridge. The red dots on the star map were closer. Maya spoke quietly. "Captain, the enemy is closer than we thought." "Do it," he said. "We choose to live long enough to fight." Alex stood on the bridge and watched the enemy fleets draw closer. The red dots were now like small fires on the map. They were close enough to see. He knew the Deathworld armies would not stop. They would not ask questions. They would not show mercy. But Alex also knew something else. Humans did not need mercy. Humans needed only a reason to fight. And now humanity's last battle had begun. The last light was not alone for long. The Deathworld fleets arrived like a storm. The ship's radar showed dozens of ships in all directions. Some were small and fast. Some were huge and slow. All of them were built for war. Their shapes were strange. Their engines were loud. Their weapons were ready. Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge and watched the numbers climb. The map was full of red dots. The dots moved closer, faster, and without fear. Maya Bell spoke quietly. "They are surrounding us. Shields are down to 20%. Send the false signal." It was a signal meant to lure the enemy closer. The Deathworld ships responded quickly. They moved in as if they were sure of victory. They opened their weapons and fired. The first shot hit the last light's outer hull. The ship shook. The lights flickered. A loud sound moved through the walls. Alex felt the shock in his bones. He held on to the console. Maya shouted, "Shields are down to 10%. He pushed the ship into a sudden roll. The last light turned sharply. It moved in a way that seemed impossible for such a large ship. The enemy ships were caught off guard. Their weapons missed. Their aim was thrown off. Maya smiled slightly. They did not expect that. It was a field of rocks and metal. It was dangerous, but it was also a shield. The Deathworld fleets did not like the asteroid belt. Their ships were built for open space. They did not like to move through debris. The last light entered the belt. The enemy ships followed, but they were slower. Some of them crashed into rocks. Some of them were hit by debris. The ship's crew cheered quietly. It was not a loud cheer. It was a small sign of relief, but the relief did not last long. A huge ship appeared from the dark. It was larger than any ship the last light had seen. It was covered in spikes. Its engines glowed with a red light. It was a Deathworld flagship. The flagship moved toward the last light with calm speed. It did not rush. It did not panic. It was confident. Maya looked at the screen. "That ship is built for one purpose." He saw the beam hitting the ship's hull. Then something unexpected happened. The last light did not explode. The hull held. The ship's outer structure cracked, but it did not break. The ship's engineers had built it with old but strong materials. The ship had been repaired many times. Each repair had made it stronger in small ways. The beam hit the hull and slowed down. The flagship's captain was shocked. The beam was supposed to destroy the ship in one hit. Maya's voice was sharp. "They did not expect the hull to hold. But we have a plan." But it was aimed carefully. The missile hit a rock. The rock exploded into smaller pieces. The pieces flew outward. One of the pieces hit an enemy ship. The ship was torn apart. Another piece hit a different ship. That ship was damaged and lost control. The Deathworld fleets were surprised. They had never seen humans use debris as weapons. Alex watched the screen. He saw the enemy ships begin to fall apart. He said, "They are not used to thinking like this." They also started to fire more aggressively. The last light took more hits. The ship shook again. The crew felt the danger. Ryan shouted, "We are losing oxygen in Section 3. Megan Lewis, the soldier, stood near the door. She looked at the sealed section. "There are people in there." She knew the captain was right. The last light continued to fight. The enemy ships were closing in. They were using their heavy weapons. They were firing energy beams, missiles, and strange projectiles. Some of the projectiles looked like living things. They moved like animals. They hunted the ship. The last light fired back with what it had. Its weapons were old and weak. But the crew aimed carefully. One missile hit a ship. Another hit a ship's engine. Another hit a ship's weapon system. The enemy fleet was losing ships, but the last light was also losing its own. The ship's lights flickered. The engines shook. The crew could hear the sound of metal tearing. Kyle spoke quietly. "We are not going to survive this." "Maybe not." He felt the weight of each life. He felt the pain of every loss. He opened his eyes and looked at his crew. "We will not stop. We can make them think we are surrendering." They did not move. They listened. The Deathworld commanders spoke to each other in their own languages. They did not trust each other, but they all trusted one thing, the end of humanity. The last light's crew watched the enemy ships. They waited. Then the enemy ships began to move closer. They were sure the ship was surrendering. They were sure the fight was over. The last light held its breath. The battle was not over. It was only beginning. The last light drifted through the asteroid belt like a wounded animal. The ship's hull was cracked, but it still moved. The crew was tired. Their eyes were heavy. Their bodies ached. But they were still alive. The Deathworld fleets had moved closer. They believed the ship was surrendering. They believed the fight was over. They were wrong. The Last Light's crew had prepared for this moment. They had set traps. They had hidden weapons. They had chosen a path through the belt that only they knew. Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge and watched the enemy ships move in. He looked calm, but inside he felt the fear. He had never been in a battle like this. He remembered Earth. He remembered how humans used to live. He remembered how humans used to argue about small things. He remembered how humans used to fight each other over land, money, and power. Now those fights seemed small. Now the fight was about survival. Alex looked at his crew. He saw their faces. He saw the fear. He saw the hope. He spoke quietly. This is not just a fight for our lives. It is a fight for the future. He moved quickly through the bridge to the power controls. His hands moved fast. He did not speak. He was focused. Alex looked at the screen. He saw the enemy ships moving closer. They were now in range for boarding. He turned to Maya. Weapons ready. Do not move too much. We need to keep our position. The Last Light's crew watched them with fear. They had never seen anything like it. Maya spoke quietly. They are boarding. A group of enemy soldiers poured in. They were tall and strong. Their skin was rough like rock. Their eyes were small and sharp. They moved like they were built for war. Megan Lewis, the soldier, stood at the door. She held a rifle. Her hands were steady. She fired. The enemy soldiers fell. Some of them fell to the floor. Some of them fell against the walls. The sound of the gun echoed through the corridor. Megan moved forward. She fired again. She was calm. She was focused. She saw a wounded crew member on the floor. She ran to him. She pulled him behind a wall. She looked at his face. He was breathing, but barely. He looked at her. Tell my wife I love her. She stood up. She fired again. The fight was brutal. The enemy soldiers were strong. They were fast. They did not feel pain like humans. They moved like machines. But the human soldiers were not weak. They were not slow. They were not afraid. They fought with everything they had. Alex moved through the ship to the control room. He wanted to see the battle. He wanted to know what was happening. He reached the control room and saw Emma Wright sitting at a console. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were red. She looked at him. Captain, they are coming through the vents. He remembered how humans used to defend cities. They would use fire. They would use traps. They would use anything. He looked at Emma. Then we use the ship. But it will slow them down. They were not expecting the doors to close. They were not expecting the air to stop. They started to cough. They started to struggle. The human soldiers took advantage of the moment. They fired. They pushed the enemy back. The battle was still not over, but the humans had gained time. Alex moved to the medical bay. He saw Eric Dalton, the doctor, working hard. He was treating wounds. He was stitching cuts. He was using whatever he could find. Eric looked up. Captain, we have too many wounded. He kept working. Alex walked through the ship. He saw the damage. He saw the fear. He saw the courage. He saw the truth. Humans survived because they did not stop when things were hard. Humans survived because they did not wait for someone else to save them. Humans survived because they kept moving forward. Alex remembered the stories of Earth. He remembered how humans survived disasters. He remembered how humans rebuilt after war. He remembered how humans kept living even when everything was destroyed. He thought about the Deathworld species. They were strong. They were brutal. They were powerful. But they had never faced a world like Earth. They had never faced a species that learned to survive in the face of constant failure. Humans did not survive because they were perfect. Humans survived because they learned from their mistakes. Alex returned to the bridge. He looked at the screen. The enemy ships were still outside. They were still trying to break in. Maya spoke quietly. Captain, they are sending more boarding craft. He saw the numbers. He saw the small amount of ammo left. He nodded. Then we use what we have. Yes. They prepared to board again. The last light waited. Alex looked at his crew. He saw the fear. He saw the courage. He saw the hope. He spoke quietly. When they come inside, we will show them what humans are made of. The lights flickered. The last light was damaged. The ship was old. The ship was tired, but the crew was not. The Deathworld armies believed they had already won. They believed they had defeated humanity, but they did not know the most important thing. Humans did not fight only to win. Humans fought to survive. And humans never stopped fighting. The last light drifted in the asteroid belt like a broken ship. The hull was cracked. The engines were weak. The lights flickered. But the ship was still alive. The Deathworld fleets were closer now. They believed the ship was surrendering. They believed the humans were finished. They were wrong. The enemy ships opened their boarding ports. They sent out more small craft. They sent soldiers. They sent machines. The last light's crew waited. Captain Alex Carter stood on the bridge. His eyes were tired. His face was pale, but his voice was steady. "Prepare for boarding," he said. Maya Bell nodded. "Weapons ready." "Then we stay still. We make them come to us." Megan fired again. She ran forward. She threw a grenade. The grenade exploded. It blew the enemy soldiers back. Megan looked at the enemy soldiers. She saw their faces. She saw the fear in them. They were not used to fear. They were used to killing, but humans were not easy to kill. More enemy soldiers came. They moved through the corridors. They moved through the vents. They moved through the ship like a flood. The human soldiers fought back. They used every weapon they had. They used knives. They used fire. They used explosives. They fought in small groups. They fought in tight spaces. They fought in the dark. The enemy soldiers were strong, but the human soldiers were clever. They used traps. They used the ship's structure. They used the vents. They used the one thing the enemy did not expect: human creativity. Alex watched the battle on the bridge. He saw the enemy soldiers moving through the ship. He saw the human soldiers fighting. He knew they were losing ground. He knew the ship was dying, but he also knew something else. The enemy soldiers were getting tired. The Deathworld fleets had never fought a ship like this. They had never fought a species that would fight even when it was losing. They had never fought a species that would not stop. Alex looked at Emma Wright. "How many enemy soldiers are inside?" "We can overload the core. We can create a massive explosion." He thought of the people who still lived. He said, "We move the crew to the escape pods. We send them away. Then we overload the core." He saw the fear. He saw the courage. He saw the hope. He said, "We make time." Some stayed quiet. Noah the boy stood with his hands on his pockets. He looked at Alex. "Captain," he said, "will we win?" He saw Ryan, he saw Megan, he saw Eric, he saw the people who had become his family. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. He looked at the ship. He looked at the enemy. He knew what he had to do. He walked to the core room. The core room was hot. The air was thick. The walls were glowing red. The core was old. It had been repaired many times. It was not perfect, but it was strong. Alex stood in front of the core. He looked at the controls. He spoke into the intercom. "This is Captain Alex Carter. To all human survivors, you must live. You must fight. You must never forget what we did here." He felt the ship's final breath. He closed his eyes. He remembered Earth. He remembered the people he loved. He remembered the future he wanted. He smiled slightly. The last light began to explode. The explosion was huge. It shook the asteroid belt. It sent debris flying in all directions. It created a bright light that could be seen for miles. The Deathworld ships were caught in the blast. Many of them were destroyed. Many of them were damaged. The Deathworld fleets were shocked. They had not expected the humans to destroy themselves. They had not expected the humans to use the ship as a weapon. The Deathworld commanders looked at the wreckage. They looked at the bodies. They looked at the burning ships. They realized something. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not easy to kill. Humanity was dangerous. The surviving human escape pods flew away from the explosion. They moved toward the edge of the asteroid belt. They moved toward the dark. The people inside watched the sky. They saw the bright light of the explosion. They heard the distant sounds of ships breaking. They cried. They cheered. They were alive. They were human, and they were not finished. The Deathworld fleets retreated. They had lost too many ships. They had lost too many soldiers. They had seen the power of a species that would die to win. They knew that if humans could do this with one damaged ship, humans could do more with a fleet. The Deathworld commanders called a meeting. They spoke in their own languages. They argued. They were afraid. They decided to stop the attack. They decided to withdraw. They decided to watch. They decided to learn. The survivors of the last light drifted through space. They were tired. They were sad. They were scared, but they were alive. Captain Alex Carter was gone. The ship was gone, but the message remained. Humanity was still here. Humanity had fought. Humanity had warned the galaxy. The war was not over. But the Deathworlds had learned one truth.